Good afternoon, Ways and Means Committee. Start off by appreciating the beautiful flowers and the beautiful maple sugar candy that you folks brought in today. Like, the room is very bright and different at all. So we're going to spend most of the week on childcare financing with a few other things popped in here. We're going to take some more testimony on that line charge for the Universal Service Fund. We're going to go back to 45 because the commission wants to spend some more time talking to us about it. And we have a few charter changes later in the week. So should be a fun mix of stuff. Going up on the end of the session and things getting a little wilder. Likely next week, we're going to have both the child care bill and S100 simultaneously. So trying to do as much prep as we can so that we can move bills once they get here. So if you have thoughts on testimony, you're probably going to want on either of those bills. Let me or Swisher know earlier on the process, other than if they're here. And with that, Dylan, do you want to come talk to us about your proposals?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Have you been here before?
This is actually my very first time testifying. This committee.
Welcome, so good to have you.
Good to be here. For the record, Dylan Zwicky with Leonine Public Affairs here on behalf of the New England Connectivity and Telecommunications Association, or NECTA. NECTA is a nonprofit industry trade group representing internet service providers and television and content creators in the New England region.
What are the contact?
I think NBC, Universal television networks. So here today to talk about the committee's contemplation of moving the USF from a percentage fee to a per line charge. NECTA does not have a position on whether this state should stick with the percentage or move to a per line charge. But if the committee does move towards the direction of a per line fee, we would respectfully request that you consider further defining the term line. And I realize you heard from my colleague Scott Mackey on behalf of the wireless industry last week or a couple of weeks ago. His suggestion of the term, adding the word voice to the definition drafted by Legislative Council, I think is well taken by our folks. Because we are fixed providers and not wireless providers, we have an additional suggestion, which I think Sorcia has put on your committee page, that builds off of the language that was drafted by Maria. And the intent really here is to address multi-line business customers. So think about a large organization that may have, 500 employees. They may have 500 phones on their desks, but the way that the service is provisioned by the service provider does not actually mean that all 500 lines can dial the 911 network at a simultaneous point in time. There's a fairly large pipe through which the data is conveyed, and some of that pipe is reserved for the voice services. The other may be for data or broadband or other purposes. And so when the provider sets up the service for that customer, they're assigned a certain number of lines. The way that in the voice industry charges are assessed is you don't pay per telephone number, you pay per line. And so the intent here is just to provide some clarity to the service providers, make sure that everyone is assessing the per line charge in an equal and clear manner, and to kind of clear up some areas where there's been litigation and other areas in other jurisdictions where they've moved to a per line fee. So we think this provides the clarity necessary to make sure that we're providing clear linkage between the ability to access 911 simultaneously and the fee that's charged. I know my colleague Scott Mackey had cautioned the committee against putting a cap on business lines. This is not intended to be a cap. It's just clarifying what is a line. So
A lot of questions and comments.
Happy to answer.
Anyone? Okay. So did you?
But I'll defer. One other distinction that was brought to our attention was to be specific and specify incoming lines rather than outgoing. There is a numerical difference, we are informed. And does that coincide or overlap with your urging for us to use the predicate voice? Or these are different?
So you had heard testimony previously, I believe from the wireless industry, they had asked you to include the term voice. I don't think, and I'd have to go back and listen to the testimony. I don't recall them commenting on whether it should apply to ingoing versus outgoing. This language would have the effect of lines accessing 911. So think I'm in a business and I'm calling 911, and so therefore I'm utilizing the 911 system. And that is the line that should be assessed, the fee, not incoming.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think through the mechanics of this to make sure that it is in fact sort of definitionally clear.
Mm-hmm.
So when one of these providers enters into a contract, how is the number of lines capable of accessing the 911 system defined in that contract?
Yes, so they would have as part of that contract, a stated number of lines that are capable of dialing out simultaneously, not just to the 911 network, but any outgoing numbers and outgoing calls. So that they can change that. I think it depends provider to provider. Some may do it on an annual basis. Some may allow for that number to be changed quarterly or monthly. But the point being that both the customer and the provider have a clear understanding of the number of lines that are provisioned to that particular customer.
And the language used in that case is people dialing out simultaneously?
Correct.
And if the contract is for 45 lines dialing out simultaneously, and say there's a massive emergency and 50 people try to call 911 simultaneously, what happens to the other 5 people?
I did ask that question. And my understanding based on the answer is that they would either receive a busy tone or some type of notification message, but they would have already filled the 45 other calls that are already outgoing. So
It's been a very long time since I worked anywhere with that many.
yeah, there's probably not. I mean, there are large, you could think medical center in Burlington, university. But.
And then you mentioned that you all drew this language from various court decisions in other jurisdictions. Can you tell me about those states?
I would be happy to have someone come back to talk more about the litigations that happen in other states. My understanding is that this attempts to avoid that by providing any lack of clarity or ambiguity in the definition.
Even just a list of those states would be
yes,
great.
I can.
Maria actually is just trying to figure out how this lines up with language she puts there.
I think one thing that this committee may or may not have discussed already is that Vermont is a little bit unique in the way that we assess USF and 911, and that many other states, those charges are split out, and the 911 charge is specific to funding the 911 system. USF is used to fund others. In Vermont, we have it all kind of looped into one. And so that was part of the challenge in developing some of this language. So it may not 100% align based on the fact that we have one fee, but I'm happy to provide sort of a reference to other states that this would match up with.
I'm generally in favor of sharpening up definitions and removing ambiguity. Mm-hmm. Having said that, our job is obviously in this case to fill the coffers of the people who are supported by this. So would we have, or how would we have information sufficient to make an estimate, or the JFO make an estimate as to, okay, how many voice lines, your word, are in the state, and what will that give us, so to say? How would we approach our fiscal responsibility?
Sure. Very good question. The industry is required to report to the FCC on their number of addresses that they serve in the state. And so those numbers we've looked at, and they've seemed to match up with, I think that's where the JFO or Ledge Council estimate for the $7 million that you need to fulfill for the 911 system. So our understanding is that would be an accurate representation of the revenue needed.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Just in the next steps for this language, or think about trying to find a place for it to live.
Yeah, and figure out, we received a few memos about the agency of transportations. follow through on statutory provisions regarding right of ways and telephone service. And there's just like a collection of places that our telecommunications tax system has not could use some modernization, we'll say. So figuring out how many of those things we could take little pieces of this year and how many might be a summer project for next year.
Yeah, summer project, if you're a project, and sorting it all out, you know, mapping it out somewhere. I guess one question is, to the extent that there's revenue available, who's it come from and how much do we want? And for what purpose? I mean, we could just go wild and some people wouldn't appreciate that very much, I suppose.
Thank you, Dylan.
Thank you.
One more, I think maybe, maybe. My only experience with this was with the school system, where you have one line, or you have a one line coming into the school, but they want to identify, if you're dialing 911, which classroom sent 911. Is that similar to this situation? And is there any, anything in that structure that makes this, that should be taken into account?
You may be getting beyond my level of expertise. I'm happy to get an answer and follow up.
Okay, that would be good.
And I think any work that we do on all of these different pieces is gonna need to spend some time with the environment and energy. Especially, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And looking at the communication, the intersection with our communication union districts and making sure we're not doing, that whatever we're doing is really working to strengthen their work and their capacity. So a pretty important part of this all. So I think someone from there is gonna come in at some point soon as well to comment on this piece and then maybe to think about next steps with us. And with that, should be on this way. We're gonna take a deep breath.
If anyone is admiring these tulips, I would like to celebrate Maury Hill Farm from Crestway, Vermont, which produces these beautiful tulips.
Is that
Could be yours for Mother's Day for a friend.
Is that the flower farm you worked at this summer?
It is. It's my summer self-care program. It's, working on a flower farm.
They're really very, very beautiful.
The rest of this and other catkins.
This is a variegated willow bush that I have in my yard, and then this is a,
Elder kick.
I believe it's a pussy willow that's gone.
Right.
And then these are daffodils that I were hoping were more open in my yard this morning. But
Maybe they'll.
I'm hoping it will bring us joy over time.
And the frilly tulips, what are those called?
French.
Carl, do you work at a flower? How do you know?
Actually, no, I just pretend.
My father always says, not always right, but never in doubt.
I like that. My father says that too.
Channel that.
I think we might have
Named after some or something.
After being in this building, it's very nice.
Carrot tulip, thank you. Yes, carrot tulips. I thought that's what they were
I
called.
worked also I worked in a flower shop, and I also worked in a greenhouse and farm stand for years.
But, you know, Dave would be like, can you go harvest that row of peonies? And I'd be like, wow, you insist. I'll go gather all those beautiful flowers and hold them.
Everybody,
What was that quote? I love that quote.
Not always right, but never in doubt.
I think we could.
Go offline.
Oh, thank you. Dorsha, helpful clarification. Hello, we're gonna stop talking about tulips and invite you to join us in that lovely chair right here. We are continuing our conversation about S5. The sergeant brought to my attention that we had not yet walked through the fiscal note for it.
Great. So for the record, Ted Barnett, Joint Fiscal Office, I probably should hop into a Zoom and share my screen.
That would be just.
Yes, great.
And then while you're doing that, I'll just bring attention to everyone for the the other thing on the table, which is really delicious maple sugar candy that Carolyn brought in that she made herself this week.
Oh my gosh.
Amazing.
Yourself, there are 2 more boxes in my drawer, so don't hold back. Enjoy them. And they're great to pop in a cup of coffee.
No, I think it's,
Gluten-free, Bill.
That sounds.
Do not sugar free.
pause proceedings for a moment.
Oh, they're like smooth, buttery. Oh.
Very tasty.
Lousy.
Bill.
I need to try another one to make sure.
Yeah, really. And help me confirm that. Thank you very much.
Oh my God, it is buttery.
I'm eating a clock.
Okay, Ted, are you in the, no, you're eating, sorry.
No, I am in Zoom and also eating. Yes.
Is it accurate that we don't have something on our page? We don't have this document yet?
We do. No, it's
Refresh.
I've hit refresh a couple times.
Sorry.
I know the plan. I'll just wait.
It might be,
Some magic might
you
happen.
have to clear your history.
That was really good. Now I'm ready to talk about pass-through entity taxes. So with this fiscal note, the fiscal note contains a lot of information that I've already presented to the committee. This just kind of gives a summary with many more words and fewer bullet points and fewer graphs. But to kind of start with the bill summary, pass-through entity tax is an elective entity level tax on certain pass-through businesses, including partnerships and S corporations. Importantly, LLCs or single member sole providers would not be eligible for the tax. This tax structure, you'll hear it called quite a bit a salt cap workaround. And that is because it is kind of a structure that has been created in many other states to get around the limit on state and local tax deductions of $10,000 that was put in place by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. The bill also creates a personal income tax credit equal to 90% of the pass-through entity tax paid by an individual. And it also would create a 90% credit for taxes paid, pass-through entity taxes paid to other states as well. It's elective in that all members and officers of the pass-through entity would have to elect to be liable for this pass-through entity tax and renew this election annually. And the bill includes language, this has come up a couple times, that would repeal the PTE tax if federal limitations on the SALT deduction are repealed as well. And I know there's a lot of, there are a number of proposals to do something with the SALT deduction, but that is at the federal level, and you know, we'll see if that legislation comes to fruition. The big reason why this thing exists, the pass-through entity tax, is to help pass-through owners decrease their federal taxable income, and a JFO estimate puts this these federal savings at $10 to $20 million annually. On the state side, JFO estimates that the bill would increase general fund revenues by $800,000 annually in fiscal years 2024 through 2026. This is slightly higher. Last time I sat in the chair, I gave a number of 500,000. We dug a little bit deeper into the data and built kind of a model, in the process of building a model that could adjust the credit and take-up rates. We found a couple extra $100,000. And so, did want to note that we talked with the Department of Taxes. They did mention there would be some administrative costs, but they don't anticipate having to hire new staff or bring in kind of a bookable amount of cost in setting up the new tax. So in some of the background and detail section, I'm just going to pull out, I'm not going to read all of this, but pull out some of the higher level facts. As of March 2023, 32 states and New York City have this pass-through entity tax structure. And really wanted to flag in the state level revenue estimate. This $800,000 really depends on the number of people who elect this tax. And as we've mentioned before, every person's tax kind of situation is different. And so we kind of had to put a few numbers on take-up rates and any kind of changes in the amount of people, if a lot of pass-through owners decide that the structure really is an advantageous situation for them and take-up rates are higher than we're anticipating, it could increase revenues. But on the flip side, if it's not as advantageous as we thought, it may be a bit lower than $800,000. So there is a little bit of potential kind of flex in that estimate, depending on take-up rates. But really, again, going back, that the real point of this tax and why it was created is for the federal tax savings for pass-through shareholders or members of pass-through entities. And again, just going back to that estimate of in Vermont, the federal tax savings would be $10 to $20 million annually.
Can you?
Yes. What did you use for a take-up rate? How many people would be getting that 10 or 20 million? 10 to 20 million.
Yeah, so we estimated our different take-up rates. We did it depending on AGI level. So folks above $1 million, our take-up rate was 75%. And then above 500,000, our take-up rate was 65%. And then under that, we really anticipated that there isn't enough kind of federal, state and local taxes to really benefit from the structure. So there wasn't enough revenue kind of below the $500,000 AGI.
What about number of people, taxpayers?
I would have to go and take a look at I don't have it in this fiscal note, but I have the numbers and I can times it by the percentage. I would just have to kind of do that sitting at a computer and not in the chair.
Okay.
Yep.
I'd be interested to know how many Vermonters are impacted by it.
Sure. Good question.
Back to you if you have more.
Sure.
Yeah.
I could run, if the committee would find it helpful, I have the example of how this structure would work and kind of go through how it shows up on the income tax side and the corresponding credit.
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So the pass-through entity tax as proposed would follow a structure. And it would start with the business paying the pass-through entity tax on its net income. And I'm actually going to jump back and forth. I'll go through the numbers. Okay. And then shareholders divide that net income depending on their respective share of the business that they're responsible for and pay personal income tax on their share of that net income. And then each shareholder receives a refundable personal tax credit for the share of that pass-through entity tax that has been paid kind of on their behalf by the entity. And so this credit is designed to offset the personal income tax paid and avoid double taxing the same net income, which would be taxed at the entity level. So you want to avoid paying the pass-through entity tax and then having members of the pass-through entity also pay again from that revenue that's passed through on their personal income taxes. On the federal side, really where this works is the pass-through entity tax is deductible as a business expense from the person who's reporting this income on their net income on federal taxes. And so yes, that deduction of pass-through entity tax lowers their taxable income at the federal tax return and reduces their tax liability. So with that kind of overview, go into specific numbers. Yes, as it says here, business expenses are not limited by the state and local tax cap of $10,000, so you can deduct the full amount of business expenses. So here's an example of the pass-through entity tax. The entity earns...
Please talk a little bit slower.
Sure.
Thanks.
Yes, I sometimes have a habit of talking quickly, and I'm going to take a drink of water and help slow myself down.
that, I've known some other representatives over the years who spoke so fast that I don't think they understood what they were saying.
I hope I'm not talking that quickly for you all. So in table one, the business net income of this entity is $2 million. And there are two partners in this business. They split the business 50-50. And the pass-through entity tax rate is 7.6%. This is set in statute as it aligns it with the second highest marginal rate. And that is equal to 7.6%. And so on $2 million in net income, the amount of pass-through entity tax paid is $152,000. And then each partner, since they split the business 50-50, pays $76,000. It's half of the $152,000 in pass-through entity tax paid. And so table 2, which is unfortunately cut between 2 pages, shows how one of the partners, these partners they're not married. We're just going to forget about one of the partners. We're going to look at the tax example of one specific partner in this business. And so it starts with their net income, which is half of $2 million. And so their net income is $1 million. And then they get to deduct the amount of pass-through entity tax paid on their Vermont personal income tax. And so their AGI in this example is $924,000. So that's the bolded line here. In this case, just for the sake of the example, this filer is married filing jointly. They don't have any children and they have 2 exemptions. And so on this, the amount of state income tax that is paid on $924,000, we have a calculator, it's $72,000 and $72,018. The amount of, so they then get their 90% tax credit for the amount of pass-through entity tax paid. And that is $68,400. So that's 90% of $76,000, which they paid in pass-through entity taxes. And so they subtract that from their state income tax liability. And what's left over is roughly $3,600, not roughly, what's left over is $3,618. And is this speed working for the committee?
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Yeah.
So why is it 90%? Is that federal law or where'd that come from?
That is the way this specific bill has created the structure of the credit. Other states have chosen to do differently sized credits. Connecticut has a credit that's 87.5%. Other states have 100% credit. It really decides on the policy choices that were made by that particular state.
And so the 2 levers what are the 2 levers that we have in this bill?
Yes, so one of the levers is adjusting the size of the credit. So by decreasing the size of the credit, the state retains more money. And so that, yes, that would influence revenues that way. If you increase the size of the credit, taxpayers are getting more money in return and it would decrease the amount of revenue the state gained. The other one is the pass-through entity tax rate. So here it's 7.6%. You could change it to a different percent if that's what the committee wanted to do. The revenue impact of that is not as clear as the credit because as you make adjustments on the tax rate, the credit then absorbs a lot of that change. So if you increase, let's say if you increase the pass-through entity tax rate from 7.6 to 8%, you would gain more revenue from the pass-through entity tax, but then you would refund more of it to folks on their personal income taxes. If you kept the credit at the same percentage of 90%. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And so on table 3 here in the appendix, we summarize all these moving pieces. The example focused on the taxpayers' Vermont taxes, but table 3 also brings in the changes that would happen on the federal tax side as well. So first column shows under current law, there's no state level entity tax, pass-through entity tax. So the amount of tax they would pay in that case is 0. Their state income tax is $78,668. That amount is higher because their net income without a pass-through entity tax is $1 million. And so their total state taxes is $78,668. And in this example, their federal income tax would be $219,449. And so with the pass-through entity tax, they now pay their share of the pass-through entity tax is $76,000, as we showed in the earlier table. The state income tax is $3,618, and so their total state taxes is $79,618. That's a little bit more than it was under current law, and that relationship really depends on you have the credit is a little bit higher than the highest marginal personal income tax rate, so the state gets a little bit of extra revenue in this example, but you can see the main difference is on federal income taxes. It's decreased to $196,953. So the state gains an extra $950. The federal government loses $22,196. And so the net tax liability is this taxpayer would save $21,546.
Okay, I'm trying to get this. So who paid 76,000? The entity?
The entity, yes.
So the entity paid that money before the 50% division happened, before the partners got their half.
They would pay it at the entity level and before that income was passed through to the partners.
Okay. And then it's the partner that we're talking about who paid the $3,618
On their personal income taxes.
on his personal income tax. Okay. And on his business tax form, that's where the $76,000 was paid, so that money's gone.
Yes, there would be a specific, and Commissioner Bolio is here, so I would be curious to see how it would be. I don't know how it'd be specifically implemented, but there would be a entity kind of, I don't know how the form would report it, but yes, there would be an entity level tax that would be reported on kind of away from personal income.
So why is the total state tax amount bigger?
The state tax is a little bit higher because the credit is 90%. And when Graham Campbell, who was at JFO before me, wrote an issue brief, he described it. I had to do some mental thinking about it to make it work, but it's helpful to think the way he phrased it of the 90. So a pass-through entity tax with the 90% credit is instead kind of thinking of that 90% as a 10% tax because the state is retaining that 10%. It's refunding 90% to the taxpayer and is retaining 10%. And since that 10% is slightly higher than the personal income tax tables, right, the highest marginal rate is 8.75, the state retains extra money based on that income.
So the state keeps 10% of the 78,000?
The state keeps 10% of the $76,000.
Craig's gonna jump in and sort of explain all of this one more time too.
Really ready for the free lunch metaphor.
He'll also talk about free lunch if he does, yes.
And certainly the 90% is a starting place proposal.
Absolutely.
We could adjust
It could be
that.
50%.
Or 85.
Sure.
Or 80.
Okay.
Or no refund at all, yes.
Yeah.
Go.
Can you go down a little bit and explain again, other way, sorry.
Oh, the table, this one? Yes.
Perfect. Yes, right there. So explain again how you got from the 76 to the 72,018?
Sure. So those are two different, the $76,000 is paid by the entity.
That's the
7.6%. Right. And so the 72,000 is what would have been members' personal income tax liability on $924,000.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Great.
Needed it all.
Right. It's kind of helpful to like think of what's happening at the entity level is because kind of similar to like corporate taxes, right? Like the entity level is what's happening at the business and the business is paying those taxes. And then at the personal level, members have to file the personal taxes.
Okay. Thank you. That's
Sure.
very helpful. I think we're gonna move to Commissioner Bolio
Great.
now. And, but I think maybe have you back again. I wonder if a process map, like a flow chart rather than a table, would help some people brains on this one. If you wanted to sit down and draw it together sometime.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good idea to give it a shot. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Bolio, are you interested in sharing your screen, or would you like us to follow along on our own devices?
Is that, oh, I had asked. Okay.
Yeah, I'm still trying to find that document though.
February 7th, I think it was.
All right.
I'm going to start with trying to reinforce the example that Ted just walked through. Thank you for doing the heavy lifting right there. And then I'll jump into my presentation from today. And yeah, sure. And it's this slide once you've got it, the one with all the green and stuff on it. So I'm going to pull an older presentation that has a slide that I don't have in my presentation today to start. I'm throwing a lot of twists and turns in here.
It's from the tax relief.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much. Craig Bolio, Tax Commissioner. Happy Tax Day, everybody, by the way. This is like the Super Bowl for us tax nerds, so a lot of excitement in the air.
I had a Chamber of Commerce event yesterday, and I tried to get everyone in the room to celebrate tax day with me, and it did not.
If I may,
We're kindred spirits here. I appreciate
if
that.
I may, Mr. Bolio, I was stunned at how quickly I got my Vermont tax return, so good.
Happy to help. We set the most ambitious refunding goal ever last year, and we met that, and we are exceeding that pace this year. So there's a lot of hard work ahead of us, and I don't want to get ahead of that, but we've been feeling good this year. All right, so awesome. Thank you so much, Sorcha. So I'm going to try to, this is another slide that I had presented before. It's slightly different numbers, but similar kind of example to try to walk through how this works. So in the top left box is no pass-through entity tax, right? So take $1 million of S Corp income. In my example, let's just talk one owner. So one owner gets that $100 million. They get $100 million on the federal K-1, SALT deduction cap of $10,000. I'm saying they pay about $300,000 in federal taxes, about $80,000 in state taxes. The top right box is that same example with a pass-through entity tax and 100% credit, right? So they pay the $76,000 in pass-through entity tax. That's a 7.6% rate that Ted was just talking about. That is fully deductible at the entity level. And so their federal K-1 distribution becomes $924,000, right? And so that reduces their federal taxes by about $25,000. And this is the original issue we were working through as we started talking about this last year. That also means there's a state revenue loss with 100% credit, right? So the solution that is put forward in S45 is to not offer that 100% credit, right? And so Representative Brannigan, that speaks to the why is it 90%. In the lower left, we walk through that same example with the 90% credit, right? So same $1 million in S Corp income, same $76,000 in pass-through entity tax, same K-1 distribution, but they get the $68,400 credit for pass-through entity taxes paid, the same number that Ted had just presented on as well. So now their federal savings are still about that $25,000, but they pay a little bit more to the state. And the lower right box really tries to get at that why. Why is that happening, right? So for each additional dollar of pass-through entity tax paid, the taxpayer gains at most 8.75 cents, right? Because that's the highest marginal rate in Vermont, 8.75%. But they lose the dime because of the 90% credit. So that's that 10% tax that Ted was speaking to. And it's that difference, the 10% less the 8.75%, that is really the money that the state is retaining So for each dollar of pass-through entity tax paid, the state gets an extra cent and a quarter that it would not have otherwise gotten without this structure. But the taxpayers love to make the election because they're gaining probably between 24 and 37 cents on the dollar at the federal level.
Representative Bodie?
So before there was a change at all, before the federal change, would the pass-through entity have gotten what you show up in the upper right-hand corner? I mean, no, it's not smart. But would they have paid anything to Vermont?
Not at the entity level, most likely, right? So this structure is, they would have paid through personal income taxes. So the money would have, that $1 million would have flowed through to the owner, and the owner would have claimed that $1 million of income and paid it on personal income taxes.
And paid the 8.
And it would have been about 80,000, rough
They
shot.
would have paid 0.0875 at that rate?
Not for every dollar of income, right? Because it's progressive. So I don't know exactly what the effective rate is on that. The highest marginal rate is 8.75%, but well, it results in about 80,000. So the effective rate is about 8% overall. But most of the income there is paid at that 8.75%. And so they pay a little more to Vermont with this new structure, and they pay less to the feds.
How much more?
About $1,000 in this example. And for
8.7, just 8.0875. If you adjust it to something else, then.
Well, I think there's two ways to change how much the state retains. The first is changing the pass-through entity tax rate, which in S45 is 7.6%, and the other is changing the credit on the back end. But this is a great segue. Maybe I could move to my new presentation. It tries to talk through some of this stuff. Awesome. Thanks, Sorcia, if you don't mind swapping for it. And I'll start right on slide 2. And I've, with the ones that says headlines, again, I'm very appreciative of Ted doing a lot of the heavy lifting, walking through it, because my presentation today tries to focus on some of what I've heard in the committee questions and comments to try to speak to some of those. I know you've heard it from me before, but I always got to do my 2 headlines, right? This is the closest thing I've ever seen to a free lunch in state tax policy, which means you can offer a portion of constituents a federal tax cut while generating, the latest estimate is 800,000 for the state. And you don't need any dynamic modeling or discussion of the Laffer curve to do it. It's just straight math. That's nuts, right? So, and it's also, I've been calling it the Wayfair of the 2020s, right? Meaning all the cool kids are doing it because it's such a no-brainer that it's like sweeping the country like a Taylor Swift tour, right? Or whatever analogy you want to take.
You really get this Ticketmaster really like fit in.
Ticketmaster is uninvolved in this as far as I'm aware. So on the next slide, it really shows in the map what I'm talking about, right? And so this shows a map around the country of what states have done this. If the state is in blue, it means they can't do it because they don't have state personal income tax. You need state personal income tax to do this. The yellow ones are the ones that could and haven't yet. There are 10 of those, and the green are the ones who could have and have. So since I last showed this, there have been 2 additional states, Indiana and Kentucky. I count 31. I'm never looking to battle with JFO, but so that it's a little bit of a difference there, but it's a lot, right? My count is 31 out of the 41 who could have done this. And as you dive down under the next level, on the next slide, please, Sorcia, I thought it would be interesting for the committee to see what does their credit structure look like, right? We were talking about you've got the pass-through entity taxes, but you need some kind of mechanism to either deduct the income on the back end or offer a credit so you're not double taxing it. 2 levers that I've seen, or 2 mechanisms, I guess I shouldn't confuse the word levers, but 2 mechanisms I've seen that do that. One is to offer a credit, which is what S45 does, and the other is to have taxpayers deduct the income on the personal income tax side. I actually think that's a lot more complicated to model and administer. And so far fewer states have done that. But by my count, 23 of the 31 states who have done this do a credit. What is most eye-opening to me is out of those 23, 19 offer a 100% credit. And I believe almost all of those are refundable. I know Utah is not refundable, but you can carry it forward for 5 years. That sounds very unusual to me, but I think the others are refundable. And mathematically, a 100% refundable credit in this structure is a state revenue loss if you start with adjusted gross income. So that was kind of eye-opening to me that most states are eating a state level revenue hit with this policy as well.
I'm astonished. Have you asked any of your counterparts why would the state of Colorado or Massachusetts or Missouri do that?
I don't know. I haven't had a lot of those kind of conversations. And there is, I must say, like within those 19 states, it's possible that some of them have a different nuanced provision that I haven't seen, or they don't start with adjusted gross income, and so that might do it. But if you start with adjusted gross income and you have 100% refundable credit, you're going to lose revenue.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
If you're hypothesizing about this, I went to a number of statewide tax conferences this summer, and many states right now are sort of taking the particular political majority they have and essentially stripping their entire tax structure bare. And with all the federal money, they are taking this opportunity to basically try to fund their state on the sales tax alone in some cases. It's pretty remarkable how much tax reductions some states are moving towards. I don't know if their commissioners are all on board with it.
Sorry.
I could see that, as being part of one of those moves as well. But we can talk about national trends and taxes.
Clearly not a direction we've committed to go in.
Yeah, not one the governor proposed, right? There are 4 states that don't have 100% credit. So Connecticut, which I've heard mentioned a couple of times, is 87.5%. Massachusetts is at 90, Mississippi at 95, and Missouri at 95. And then the rest, which is 8, I think, have that deduction mechanism. The reason that's complicated to model is it's not a simple algebra problem anymore. If you are very, very high income and it's a deduction and your marginal and your pass-through entity tax rate is lower than your highest marginal rate, you're going to pay less at the state level. If you're at the lower incomes but still qualify for this, you might pay more at the state level. So the credit structure is way easier to model. It just becomes an algebra problem. And so that's one of the reasons that the administration had put that structure forward. And I show this to just say, like, the governor's recommended version of this, right, that's in S45 is already one of the most generous in the country for the states retaining the money, right? And as Ted spoke to, the latest estimate for that is $800,000. I thought I'd hop into a few specific questions or comments that I've heard. So if you could move to the next slide, please, for me, Sorcia. So why the 7.6% pass-through entity tax rate? I'm the one who first pitched that, so I'm happy to give my thoughts. It matches the composite rate, right? And that is for both policy and administrative reasons. I've spoken a couple of times about the inequity that exists in current law that composite taxpayers, which is only available to non-resident business owners, can do this today. And that rate is 7.6%. And it also helps us administratively. I can't promise this because we're still working through how to do this, but with a 7.6%, it enhances the chance that we could use all or most of our existing forms and schedules without having to create a lot of new stuff to administer this. And it might only be around for a few years. So there's some benefit in not having to create a lot of infrastructure to do that. Actually originally pointed out to me by Ted in his last presentation, right? An increase to the pass-through entity tax increases the federal savings. That's interesting, right? Because every additional dollar of pass-through entity tax paid is another dollar that's deductible, which increases the federal savings. And it does increase the amount of tax paid to Vermont, but in a small way, right? Because you're giving most of that back with the 90% credit. So when I really had that realization, I started to think about, well, why not set it at 100%, right? Because then you maximize the federal savings and you're still going to have more savings than you are more increased taxes. And I started to look around the country and again, was sort of interested to see I don't believe any states that have the pass-through entity tax rate higher than their highest marginal rate. And speculating, I believe it's because if you put something like a 20 or 30 or 50% tax rate on this to maximize federal savings, the Treasury and the IRS would start asking questions, right? That it's not necessarily a scheme that they want to get be supportive of at that point. It's not addressed in the ruling that they issued in 2020, but it's just interesting to me that every state is at or below their highest marginal rate. There might be one state that's like 0.25% higher. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. That's the thought process right now on the pass-through tax rate. If we could move to next slide, please, Sorcia. I don't know if I've heard this specifically in this committee, but I have heard in other committees talking about this, like somebody has to pay for this. And my first answer is maybe, right? Like it's not clear to me in the structure of federal budgeting that we would, right? The CBO is certainly not going to put out a line item saying this is the federal income tax laws from Vermont adopting this. If the JFO's high estimate of $20 million of savings comes true, that is, what is that, 4.65 0.1%, if I'm reading that percentage correctly, of IRS collection. So we're talking less than a rounding error here.
IRS collections from Vermont.
From everyone.
Everyone.
So that's like total federal, I don't remember what it is, several $1 trillion. But so, I mean, this is not an amount of money that I think the federal government is going to be actively looking for. And in fact, they haven't done that kind of analysis when much bigger states have done this as well.
And to defend, I think, the conversations that led you down that road, I think it was less about the dollar lost with feds and more about perpetuating and contributing to a trend of a widening wealth gap.
Right. So on my next slide, I actually say, like, let's call it real money though, and say that somebody has to pay for it. Right. So if yes, somebody must pay for it. Right. That somebody almost surely doesn't live here. Right. Because the costs are borne out across the entire country and we're already paying for everyone else doing it. Right. California estimated that their taxpayers would save $1.5 billion. You scale that to Vermont, that means Vermonters are paying $2.25 million for California residents to enjoy this benefit. New York is estimated to save $750 million. Again, translate that to Vermont, that means Vermonters today are paying a little over $1 million to support New Yorkers doing that. And again, Vermonters are all paying for the non-residents to do this in Vermont today, which is over 80% of pass-through entity owners in the state can already do this, and the 20% who are residents cannot. So what do we say to those constituents who are already paying those added costs at the federal level if we say that somebody has to pay for it, but we won't let Vermonters enjoy that same benefit? I would also I did a little math. This was sort of interesting to me to say, okay, what if we want to say how much Vermont would pay in aggregate for that if we were to spread it out? Our share of federal personal income tax collections in the state is 0.15%. So that is about $30,000 in aggregate that Vermonters would pay to pay for our share of this $20 million. And that's again against $20 million of federal savings for everybody else and $800,000 of new revenue for the state of Vermont. So that's a pretty sweet deal.
So down the road, 5 years, 10 years, the federal government might end this.
Yep.
Next year.
Next year. It's already sunsetted.
2025, I believe it, after tax year 25, I believe it's set to sunset
Okay, I
if
didn't
no
know.
action happens.
So then what happens to us? Do we just end it cold?
So the language in S45 sunsets this structure if the federal salt cap goes away.
Sunsets it? When?
Yeah.
And so then what happens to us? We don't get the 10% anymore. And what else? What about our people? Our people are suddenly paying somewhat more in tax.
Not at the federal level because the salt cap would be gone. So they would just be fully deducting these without this workaround. So their federal tax bill wouldn't go up. But yeah, the state would lose this retainage that we're talking about. And that's one of the reasons to be thoughtful about the credit, right? If you drop the credit way down in an effort to have the state retain more, you've got to worry about what happens if this structure goes away and the state is no longer retaining that, right? 800,000 is easier to absorb than, several million.
Okay.
Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I'm processing all this as we go through, so I may have more questions at the end,
I
but
was happy it's a lot.
yeah.
And we're not going to be able to get everyone's questions answered today because we have some more folks. We have folks coming in to testify at soon, so we need to come back to it. But I know that Commissioner Beaulieu is eager to come in and discuss this anytime.
Whenever you want. on my last slide, maybe at risk of opening a debate that I regret opening, but I've heard comments about concerns about what this does to the progressivity of the tax structure, right? And I guess where I'm focusing as a state tax commissioner, the Vermont tax commissioner, right, is what's within our realm of control in our wheelhouse here, right? And Vermont has a very progressive personal income tax structure today, right? The Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, ITEP, which many people are familiar with, ranks us as the second most progressive state in the country behind California, right? So you need high income earners to be here to pay into that very progressive structure so that it can stay progressive, right? The top 20% of income earners pay 80% of personal income taxes in the state. That's like $1 billion. Right? If they're not here and they're not paying those taxes, the system has to get less progressive and put more of the tax burden on lower income and middle income folks. And if you really care about that progressive tax structure, I think you need to want those folks here in Vermont and not in another state's less progressive tax structure, right? Our neighbors in just Massachusetts are ranked 21st by ITEP for progressivity. In New Hampshire, 35th. Right? So there's benefit to us making this strategic decision that doesn't cost the state of Vermont anything and doesn't change the progressivity of the Vermont tax code to encourage those folks to be here and to pay into our very progressive system instead of one of our neighbors who have a less progressive system. Thanks for having me in.
We have a couple minutes for questions.
You expect that Congress will do something next year?
If Congress does nothing, it sunsets in tax year 26. So I don't want to speculate as to whether Congress will do something or not. But this sort of protects us either way, right? If it continues, we have it. If it does not continue, it goes away. We will have gained something for a few years and we will have lost nothing after it sunsets. Well, except the retainage.
In the fiscal note, there was a little talk about administrative costs.
Yep.
That you said that you wouldn't need. With all due respect, previously, maybe a couple weeks ago, you came in and said that you all had been doing a lot and very, very good work, and we respect your very good work, and that to do a single other thing, you would need more staff. And so I'm trying to reconcile that with the fact that you can do this single other thing without more staff.
My recollection of what I said is to do a $100 million payroll tax, I would need more staff. Yes. That is not, I mean, that's a very different thing than this, which is probably a couple thousand taxpayers and hopefully built into our existing forms. I think it's a fair question, right? The way that we've generally operated in this space is that we have certain capacities each year to build out form changes and to make adjustments within existing tax types. This feels within that realm to me. It doesn't feel like, I know it seems maybe it's a new tax type because it creates this, but it's going to exist within the BI 471, which is our business income tax return. So at this time, I don't think it needs additional resources. If you're really eager to give us additional resources to do this, we can have that conversation. But no, I don't. And I don't think there's programming costs associated with this. I think this will be within our existing ADS and FAST developer budget that we put for normal form changes.
Thanks.
On the progressivity side, you may have understood, I was talking about trying to think broadly about regressivity, including the ad valorem tax system that we have, because that's the demerit, if you will, to progressivity. And I'm publicly saying I wish we could expand the base, get the rate down. And I don't know if this is a point for a larger discussion or not, but this favors a certain segment. And frankly, we haven't done much to soften the blow of the regressivity of the ad valorem or consumption taxes. And that's a regret I have in my position here.
The administration is very eager to talk about an increase to the earned income tax credit, which might do exactly what you're saying.
I'm saying it publicly.
So the worst thing, you called on me, right?
I mean, no, but go. You have the very last question. Thanks for coming.
Okay, quick question. It'll be a quick question. The worst thing that could happen if we don't do this is is that those 400 or 500 high income earners don't get the tax break. Is that right?
I think it's in the thousands, not hundreds, but I think it's a few thousand.
2,000.
I
Did you
don't,
say 2,000?
I think I said that?
Is that a couple of thousand?
Yeah, I think it's somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000. I'd have to look. JFO did the issue brief on this and they had come up with numbers. I apologize. I don't remember exactly what they were. But right, if we don't do this, they don't get the tax break and they pay more to the federal government than they need to pay. And that money leaves Vermont.
So then, yeah, so it doesn't circulate. See, if they keep the money, it's probably going to circulate. They're going to buy a boat or, something will happen. And that money will circulate through our economy. So if they don't get it, then that money leaves Vermont. So is that all we're out?
Yeah, I mean,
10%.
That's right. You lose the retainage and you lose those federal savings and the money leaves Vermont. I mean, I think it would be a real missed opportunity not to do this. I mean, I've never seen, normally you have on the equation, tax cut equals loss in revenue and potential loss in services, right? And you have tax cut equals gain in revenue. I mean, that equation has never happened before that I can think of. So I just feel like it would be a real lost opportunity for a number of reasons if we didn't do this.
And does it lower taxes for the rest of us?
Well, it provides the retainage of 800,000. That's taking 800,000 of general fund pressure away. But it doesn't hurt anybody else either, right? Like that's the other piece, right? Normally when you're talking about a loss in revenue, you're talking about services loss. You're not having that here. Nobody's harmed by this.
I'm trying to find out what's the bad thing about this.
There isn't one, and that's.
We will have more time to try to figure out what the bad thing is.
That's why 31 out of the 41 states who could do this have done it, right? There's virtually no downside.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
John, the bad thing may be that some of those high income just decide to go somewhere else.
If we don't do it.
If you don't do it, they just may pick up.
I think there's a lot of research that high income folks tend to not circulate their money through the economy and lower income folks circulate their money through the economy. But that is like a whole economics lesson that we are not doing right now. So now we're going to talk about childcare.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have a incredible group of business folks who have agreed to join us on fairly short notice. So first I just want to say thank you so much for joining us on such short notice. And I'm so glad that we have the Zoom that allows us to have you join us. And so we're going to start with Mr. Larkin and then Mr. Leffler and then Ms. Ash and then Mr. Garter from there. And so really appreciate all of you joining us. And we have a couple hours. So please, we might have specific questions for you. Really interested to hear particularly a little bit about how sort of the childcare challenges that we're seeing now impact your business, but also sort of what you see as solutions with regards to our committee's jurisdiction of taxation. So with all of that preview, Mr. Larkin, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thanks for having me and good evening, or it's evening where I am. My name is Sean Larkin. I am a resident of South Burlington. I just happen to be working abroad these next couple of days. And I am also the CEO of OnLogic, so a company that employs quite a few people in the state of Vermont, and our headquarters are there. And we're investing a lot and building a new headquarters there. So to answer your question of what the impact of childcare, not having affordable childcare in our system, what does that do to us? We have people that they have to make really hard choices. And usually what this means is one of the members of the children need to stop working, or they have to work different hours. And it's not fair. It doesn't put them on the fair playing field, because, if they want to stay late and have different earnings opportunities, or if they want to have different trainings, we can try and accommodate everything and everybody, and we try to. But when somebody has to leave because childcare costs the same amount of their pay, or a very, very big substantial part of their pay, it is a hard decision. that parents do need to make. And I'm a single parent of 3, and it is and where I might be in the position that I can help pay for additional support. There are many people who cannot, and there are many people that we need in jobs. And if we have people in the economy that are working and they're paying taxes, that helps everybody in the economy, and it helps elevate, all the we're in technology. It helps, people in technology get better jobs, be better trained, they earn more, and they can afford to go out and buy goods and services from everybody else in the economy when we put more people to work. We have a workforce shortage. It's always hard when we are hypergrowth. So we continue to scale and double every 2.5 years. And hiring that many individuals, it's hard. And there's a whole part of our workforce that cannot come to work because of not having the right infrastructure for affordable childcare. So that's one of, it's very general. I can talk about specifics, or we can get into your other question, but did that suffice?
It does for me. I'd be curious to know how many employees you all have in Vermont.
In Vermont right now, about 180. And the facility that we're building should house another 500.
Great, thank you. And so that's a lot of people wondering why you're interested in the state taking this on rather than going at it alone.
When I really, businesses, we're going to run into the same, there's wonderful people that have already tried. As we were building our building, we were thinking about actually having a childcare facility. And Michelle, I believe, is going to be here as well. And she has firsthand knowledge of how hard this is. I mean, you can build a facility, but finding the right people, employing the right people to do wonderful childcare and paying them a livable wage, for their profession that is needed, is it's still the shortage of people and that infrastructure. We would run into the same. And in all honesty, we make computers. We're really good at making computers. Running childcare and stuff like that. There are so many people that are far better than us. If we can kind of gather around and make it a profession, have the infrastructure for the people who love to do it and are very, very good at it. So we shouldn't be in it and because there are better people than us, hands down. And I think that why I would, as I talk with the different owners and the different founders of the different companies within the state, the rhetoric seems to be pretty much, if we're going to solve this problem, are we behind you taxing or helping you fund this? The answer is yes, if you're going to solve the problem. So what we're not interested in, or I'll speak for us or on Logic, is to raise a whole bunch of taxes and we kind of have the problem, kind of go at it, and we don't solve it systemically. And then all we've done is made things more expensive for people and businesses. And then it's just expensive to live here and we don't get the results we're looking for. And that's when people come back and say, what is our government doing? And, we're part of the problem. What I am totally behind is that if we have this overarching plan to fix a systemic problem and we go all the way for it and say, hey, businesses, it will cost you this to have the infrastructure and affordable childcare. Are you behind it? The answer is yes. And I know that I believe we're trying to figure out, is it a payroll tax and income tax, all that kind of stuff. We would need to see that because they have different ramifications. But if you're looking for business leaders to say, if we do this, are you behind it? And would you be willing to jump in with us and help pay for it to solve the problem? The answer is yes, but we have to go all the way. We can't do something middle ground or it'll just become, just this arduous thing that makes things expensive and doesn't solve the problem. And I don't think anybody wants that. So does that help? Or is there something else that you would like to hear?
That's very helpful for me. Yeah, question.
Sure. Really appreciate the assessment. I guess any advice or guidance to us about how we know when we're solving the problem and how we know when we've gone too far but haven't solved the problem? Like, can you share a little bit more about what solving the problem?
It's a great question. And I'm going to have like a very super specific answer, I'm sure. I think that when the outlines that Let's Grow Kids had, where we have the ability to fund infrastructure and have teachers who want to teach that are seen as professionals and can make a livelihood here. So we can attract the right talent. So we have the infrastructure, we have the right talent, and then people can send their kids to childcare and they do not have to decide. You know, if they want to be home, great, that's wonderful. If they want to work, great, that's wonderful, that they have a choice. We know we've won when people that can make that choice for themselves. Because right now, the economics are forcing the choices and we're losing a lot of people that really want to have different choices. And so I know that's a high level fuzzy answer, but it's when people can say, I am choosing this and there's a way for me to exist in Vermont with my choices.
Yeah, thank you. It sounds like you're saying that people can afford care and that there's enough slots that they can access. And when we have enough slots that everybody can afford, then
when you don't have to wait 2 years to figure out where you're going to put your kid and delay your career or whatever, then yes, I would say that when somebody can, within 2 to 3 months, find a good, safe place for their children that is reputable, that, you know, within a few months, that there's enough slack in the system for that, that's when I think that we've won.
I also heard you say that you want the folks working in that system to be making a wage that's commensurate with their skills.
Well, yeah, because I mean, like you, me, nobody's going to want to stay there if they can't live. I mean, if you can make more money working at a fast food chain than taking care of and teaching people's children, you're going to go where you can afford to pay your bills. And so we have to make a profession out of it that we support. So it has to be all of that process. It can't just be like, well, we made it cheaper for families, but then we still can't find people to actually do the good work. And I think that the state will, in the long run, you know, based on different studies of, you know, without good childcare or support, you know, where those teenagers and kids end up, like, you know, with our prison systems and stuff, there's a lot of really good benefits that will pay off in the future. But in the immediate, are we willing to pay that immediate need to help that systemic problem or that challenge be fixed? The answer is yes. If we go through that, that's totally fixed.
What is your corporate structure?
We are incorporated in Vermont, the Inc. We are not an LLC, we're an Inc. and a corporation that's housed in Vermont. And then we have different offices in different locations throughout the world.
Thanks.
Do you folks offer like a childcare stipend monthly in an effort to retain and attract employees?
No, the best we could come up with, because we didn't know if we were going to like take money to open up a childcare or how, you know, some ways of solving the problem. The best that we've come up to right about now is, and I forget the exact term, so please forgive me. Somebody there will know it better than I, but it's where we set up different payment structures that are pre-tax, so people can pay for childcare before they're taxed, kind of like an HSA deduction. And then that can be used. So we went through as a company to go ahead and set that up for those that are here in Vermont, and to try and help a little bit. And then right as we set that up, I think 6 months later, Let's Grow Kids was kicking this off and like, oh, here can be a systemic change. Let's put, you know, the funds and different things. We put it more into advocating for this movement, because then we can fix the whole thing and not just for those that on logic.
So do you match funds that employees put into that, or do you just give them the ability to put it in there?
We give it just the ability to put it into. We do matching and other financial means for the team members, but for childcare specifically, no. It's just a means for them to pay with pre-tax dollars, which does make a difference.
Thanks.
And the Inc., the incorporated status, the Inc., what tax filing status does that make you?
That is a wonderful question that I'm sure I could find if I.
Do you want to
Is Thank you. If you could find that out for us, that would be really helpful.
And when you're saying a tax filing, are you actually talking about the main form that we use when we file our taxes? Or when you're talking about it, like, is there a sub structure of tax delineation that you're looking at? Like, what is the exact thing that you need from me? And I can get it for you.
I'm trying to understand if you're filing corporate taxes or if you're in one of the sort of like 8 other statuses that might cause mostly pass-through income.
No, we are not a holding. We are an Inc. We are a C Corp.
You're a C Corp. Thank you.
Yes, I am a C Corp, being just as vanilla as you can think. Yes.
Great. Okay, thank you. There are very few C Corps in.
Yeah, I didn't know where we were going. So
Vermont,
maybe there's something. No, we're a C Corp.
Thank you. That is helpful. That is what I was wondering.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I really appreciate it. And I hope you sleep well whatever time zone you're in. It looks very dark out.
I'm gonna grab some dinner and probably fall asleep pretty quick. So no, but thank you, and please call on me. This is important. So whatever you need.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Mr. Leffler. Hello and welcome.
Hi, how is everyone doing? I just wanted to follow up on what Sheen was talking about with why, trying to ask any individual business on why they can or cannot solve this problem. And
Before you jump in doing that, do you mind introducing yourself for the record?
Yeah, of course. My name is Brian Leffler. I'm the president of Instramart, and Instramart is located in South Burlington, Vermont, and we have about 70 employees working here.
Thank you.
And then just replying to Sheen's remark, I don't think this is a problem that can be solved by any one business. I think the problem is bigger than any one person, any one family, and any one business. And so that's why we're all here talking today, is to come up with a statewide solution for all families across all the geographies of our state.
Thank you. Mr. Larkin, did you want to jump back in? Or you? Okay, your video came back on again, so I thought you were.
Sorry, I want to see Brian work. He's great.
Okay, great.
So anyway, just
you're welcome to do that. I just wanted to make sure we weren't missing some final work for you. Welcome. Okay.
So anyway, just continuing a little bit about the Instramart story is we are a 35-year-old Vermont business. I do live and work alongside 70 Vermont families every day. I have seen the positive outcomes when a family has access to high quality, reliable childcare for their family and their children. And I've also seen the difficulties associated when people don't have high quality, affordable, reliable childcare, especially how that affects their work attendance, their stress at work, parental stress, and job performance. So I know we're all talking about funding sources. And so I know previously we are talking about a payroll tax. I did do the calculations for our business for the payroll tax that was being proposed, and we would cover that in 4 hours of operation in 1 day of the year. So when I was looking at those numbers from that point of view, I would gladly contribute company profit to solve this problem, not just for my employees, but for our community. And I think when we talk about the tax revenue required to solve this, however we come up with it, I just think we need to keep it in scope that this is something that we can do and we can afford. And then as I've been talking about this issue, I really feel like this is an investment in our state and in our children and in the future of the state of Vermont. And then I think that we can all agree that there could be some positive outcome from having high quality, reliable childcare available for all families. But I also think it could make us a destination employer across all the United States. I think that young families would move here. It could solve some of our aging demographic crisis. It could solve our lack of the aging demographic in our state, the loss of population, and we could increase tax revenue as we had more people working in Vermont and paying payroll tax, such as that. So I'm really viewing it as an investment. And I think we will see a positive ROI on it instead of a negative ROI. Instead of having to pay for something, we're going to get a little bit from it. And that was my basic remarks, and I'm happy to answer questions at this time, or tell you more about Instramart or whatever would like to know.
Thank you, Mr. Leffler. Can you just share a little bit about what the impact on your business is now of not having childcare, and do you have any sort of estimates of lost revenue or anything like that?
Well, so I think the biggest problem that all businesses are facing at this time is the one of finding new employees. Exactly this the problem that Sean was talking about. Although his business is a little larger in the Vermont size, is that when we're hiring, it's hard to find an available pool of good quality candidates with availability right now. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We there's a lot of good stuff going on in Chittenden County. We have Beta. I'm sure you people have heard about Beta, and they're hiring a lot of people. So we only have a limited number of people for the jobs that we have available. So there is some group of parents that would like to have a work, could have 2 incomes in their family, but do have a childcare issue. So I really think we're talking about increasing the employee pool. And I think we're also talking about a higher quality standard of living for those families that can have 2 incomes if they choose to do so. And then once again, when a family has reliable childcare, you can see it in the employee's demeanor at work, how their day goes, their job attendance, and their job performance. In terms of quantifying it, I think it's hard to quantify it in dollars. I do have to say, Instamart is a premier employer in the state of Vermont, and we invest heavily in our employees. I'm not supposed to brag about this, but we were just voted the best place to work in the state of Vermont last week at a competition held by Vermont Business Magazine. We have 100% employer-paid healthcare for our employees. There's no deductibles, there's no copays, and there's no prescription fees. It's $0 medical if you work here. We are investing our money in our employees. As Sean said, it's very difficult for us to run a childcare out of our building. It's hard to get it to have a childcare facility in a business building. There's a lot of regulations around that, and I don't know. That's not an equitable benefit across people who don't have children and stuff like that. So I really feel we need to invest in our childcare infrastructure, have high quality, affordable childcare available across our state, and we need to pay our these early educators, child educators at a professional level.
Thanks.
So just because you're letting me prattle on, I know we're coming up with a funding source, and I really think we need to have a broad-based, reliable, sustainable funding source for this initiative. And I've only heard that we might be looking at cobbling together some different piecemeal taxes, and I don't think that's the way to solve this problem for the long term. And
there are a lot of wild rumors that run through this building and out of this building on a regular basis. I don't think anyone's talking about piecemeal cobbled together solution.
And but so the payroll tax is the payroll tax is a proposal. We could do it with income tax, we could do it with sales tax, but a reliable, broad-based tax, and let's try and solve this problem. And as Sean said, let's take a good swipe at it. Let's put some serious money on this. And I think in 5 years we'll think it's one of the best things we've ever done. But I'm an optimistic person, and I think this is investing in our children, our families, our businesses. It's investing in Vermont.
Thank you. Do you mind sharing with me what your corporate structure is?
So we've been an S Corp for 33 years, and then right now we're an LLC because our business was sold last year. We have a new owner, but we do pay taxes to the state of Vermont because this business is domiciled in here. This is where the income is generated. Okay,
thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also, I'm happy if you can call me anytime. Call me back. I'll answer any question that we have. This is a big issue, and I think we have a lot of momentum, and now's a good time to solve it.
Thank you. I'm thrilled at how many of you were able to come in on very short notice. So thank you very much. We've been planning on having you come in a little bit later, and the schedule got wild. So thank you.
I appreciate
we have some questions for you.
Yeah. I appreciate all the work you're doing on this issue.
Word of thanks both to you and to the previous witness who described childcare workers as professional working group, which is contrary to the sort of the scuttlebutt out there is childcare workers are just people who get paid not too much, but so what? And when we begin to look at childcare workers as a profession, like we will machinists or any number of other professions, it automatically raises the regard with which they're held by people who don't appreciate the professional qualifications, how hard they work, and how it fits into the system. So thank you.
I heard also that I know that Champlain College has an early childhood ed program, and they currently have 500 students enrolled in it. And everyone's very excited about that because we think we need 2,000 early childhood educators, and a quarter of what our need is enrolled in Champlain right now. And I think if they're getting their degree like that, that is a professional occupation. As I've been learning about this issue, I know another lady that spoke very eloquently. She's a restaurateur with Honey Road. Her line cooks make more than the people that watch her child at childcare. And these things are just mind-boggling to me.
Yeah. Mr. Leffler, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. One of the things I've been contemplating, and I should have asked Mr. Larkin as well, is as a business owner, if you contemplate, let's say something sad happens and we fail to pass a child care bill. What do you think the impact of that would be on your business, like 5 or 10 years down the road?
So sadly, I just think it's status quo. So I think it's so one of the things so this is kind of a new issue to me. I've got involved with this. It's very interesting using a policy like this to have to invest in our state and, improve the quality of life for people living in Vermont, which is what you work on every day in your roles. So I've wondered why this problem hasn't been solved up till now. And I've come to figure out, or this is my opinion, that this is a temporary problem for every family. We all go through this with our children from 0 to 5 years old. We all struggle. We all make it through it till the child goes to kindergarten. And we look back and we're like, oh my God, that was really tough. But then because it's temporary, we haven't solved the problem up until now. But now with the help of a lot of advocacy and a lot of enlightened people up where you guys work and stuff, people are thinking, really trying to address this issue. And this really goes back to what I was talking about before. I think it's an investment in the state of Vermont. It's a higher quality of life for children and families in the state. We all know how important early childhood education is. I really think it would make us a destination employer. I think it would change the path for businesses in Vermont. I think we would have a higher quality group of employees ready to come to work in our growing companies and fill our jobs. And I think if we don't do it, it's going to be status quo, more of the same. And a lot of people scrambling as they did, as they've done now.
Thank you.
This is like a fairly, perhaps invasive question by business standards, so please feel free not to answer it. But I'm trying to get my head around how you might adjust your accounting with a payroll tax. Where would, how would you pay for it?
Okay, so with a payroll tax, we already pay payroll taxes now. Okay, and so when we have, and then in our general ledger, there's the salary part and there's the tax parts, and so I'm willing, so the taxes would go up. We'd pay a greater. There would, it would be. We use ADP as a payroll service, so they would take the money and remit it to the state of Vermont on a quarterly basis, like they do now, and so it would come off our profit. And so on our general ledger, our payroll taxes would be slightly higher. They've been talking about a number about 0.3% or something like that. And so that would, our expenses on our general ledger would be slightly higher. Our profit would be slightly lower. And there's many of us that are willing to make that investment to solve this problem for our Vermont families.
I've heard from a lot of folks that generally with a payroll tax, that just leads to a lowering of pay.
I don't know how to answer that. That wouldn't be how it would be approached at our business, but I don't, at Instamart, that wouldn't happen, but I could see that could happen in other places.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Ms. Ash, thank you so much for joining us today. Good to see you.
Hi, thank you for having me. And I just first want to say, express some deep gratitude for each of you. I know that you're rolling your sleeves up, and this is not easy. This is not an easy problem to solve. So thank you. For those that don't know me, my family business is Twincraft Skincare. We manufacture high-end bar soap and skincare products. We have 300 employees, and we have a facility in Winooski and 2 in Essex. So I'm going to try to be additive because my 2 peers have really outlined, I agree with everything they've said, so I'll be additive, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And if you want to hear my response to some of the ones you've already asked, happy to do that.
Before you start off, do you mind introducing yourself to us for the record?
Oh,
just say your name.
Michelle Ash.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yes.
Back to you.
Okay. Just to give you some context, for the past 10 months and for the next 6 months, we have a baby born every month at Twincraft. So we're living this real time. And one of the things that we've done to try to support our employees is we've created one in Winooski and one in Essex, a babies to work room, where there's a desk and a crib and a changing table and everything that a parent needs to bring their baby to work for the first 6 months. So that's one of the ways that we're trying to support our families. And I came to be a huge advocate for fixing this childcare problem probably about 4 years ago when we explored opening a childcare center at Twincraft. It was causing a lot of stress for employees. We had, absenteeism. It was hard to attract, all of the things that I'm sure you hear over and over again. And it became clear that this was not something that one business could fix. And I actually started asking the question back then out of frustration, like, can't we just pay into a system and have this fixed? I mean, I know how to make a bar of soap, but we don't teach babies, and that, that's the old stick to your knitting kind of thing. We're manufacturers. So 4 years ago, we were willing to pay money into a system if we could actually get this fixed. And that was before I really knew the intricacies of what was going on. So I'm a very big supporter, as is my husband, to investing in this system. I see for so many reasons. So I'd like to just sort of open it up for questions, because you guys asked very good questions. Oh, I'm going to answer this one before we get going. We are a closely held family business, an S corporation.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you so much, Ms. Ash, for coming in, or virtually, I should say. So you mentioned 10 months of babies right in your rear view mirror and 6 more months of babies ahead. Do you know how many of those families have childcare lined up?
The ones that have had babies have childcare. Half of them pieced together with family members, part-time childcare. It's a battle. And then of the babies that are coming, one has secured a spot and the others are on wait lists. So we're hopeful.
Thank you.
I'm also curious to hear more about sort of how you would integrate various taxes into your business and payroll planning.
Well, it's a good question, and it's really simple. It becomes an additional business expense, if the decision is a payroll tax and not an income tax, it would become a business expense, but we would view it as a business investment. We can't continue to grow as a company unless we have the right infrastructure to grow. So I look at this just like the roads, right? If we can't afford to just to individual companies pay for the roads so that we can actually have commerce. We also don't pay for public education. We need an educated workforce. This is that critical to not just the functioning of business, but the functioning of society. I was the chair of the Burlington Police Commission when, everything hit the fan. And I opted to leave, and mostly because philosophically what I came to understand is I was playing defense and I wanted to get involved and play offense in the state of Vermont. 70% of people that are incarcerated can't read above a 3rd grade level. We know that birth to 5 prepares people for school. So I made a decision to take my life energy and kind of play offense on that. So I am passionate about economic growth in the state. And you don't have economic growth unless you have a healthy society, because the economy is made up of people. And the healthier our people are, the stronger our economy is, the stronger our communities are. So it's like this big ecosystem. And so I see childcare as feeding that ecosystem, which is why I don't view it as an expense. And I won't view it as an expense when we have to pay it as a company. We'll view it as an investment.
Thank you, I appreciate that. You ask? Yeah.
Michelle, I'm gonna look at the fisheye instead of up at the screen where you are. I was just answering an email, listening to you from someone else who is very interested in this subject, advocating a single source for revenue. And what I take away from that request, if not necessarily direct agreement, that whatever Ways and Means sells on, and you understand we're also trying to find universal fund school meals. It needs to be straightforward and transparent from the perspective of employees throughout the state, not convoluted, not mixed up. We're always challenged trying to find revenue for this, that, and the other thing. And as you probably know, we cobble together sometimes endeavors to get, or, packages to get enough money. So I take from your testimony, other than your very strong advocacy for doing what we need to do, is try to make it as straightforward on employers as possible, whether you're child care advocates or just running a business making widgets somewhere. So that's, you can comment yes or no, but that's what I've taken from this conversation.
Just so I'm clear, is your question is regarding the source of the funding? Having it be a single source, and you're asking me to say yes or no to that? Is that your question?
No, ma'am, it's a question someone else was advocating, but I'm saying whatever we do, shouldn't we make it as straightforward as possible so any employee understands where it starts and where it ends up, rather than making it convoluted and complicated and just some other tax to be upset with?
Yeah, yes. I think simple is, when it can be simple, simple is always better. I think equally as important is it needs to be, people keep throwing the word sustainable out. And what I really think that we need to do is whatever that revenue source is, as the economy grows, we're going to need more childcare centers and spaces. So if that fund can grow, or if we set that up so that fund organically grows when we need it to grow, which is another reason why payroll and I haven't seen the numbers on income tax, so I don't have a strong opinion about either one. I just know it needs to be linked, that when the economy grows, we have more money to fund the system. When inflation is happening and we have to give raises to childcare educators, that there's an organic growth of the fund. Now, if it was a payroll tax, all employees across the state are getting cost of living increases, and therefore the fund grows to then give the educators cost of living increases. So I think whatever the funding source is, we need to make sure that it's sustainable in that way, that as we need more childcare spots, childcare centers, the fund grows so we don't keep going back to the well to try to get more money. There's a certain amount of elegance about it. So and in that case, that would be simple.
And I think an income tax would have that sort of same growth mechanism built into it. One thing I'm wrestling with is sort of the bill out of the Senate, and the bill as it sort of seems to be taking shape in our House committee is really going sort of halfway to what the Rand report, and I know that you're sort of deeply in this, so I'll reference the Rand report with you, what the Rand report sort of says is the end point, or sort of finishing the job. And we heard from our first witness that go big or go home, people. And so, and I know the system is not ready for 100% right now, that we will need to stage this out, and I appreciate that that's why the House committee is doing that. And so it's important, yes, to find a revenue source that will be sustainable and able to grow over time. I'm curious, as a business owner, what it would be like for you to be able to know what that plan is over the next 5 years, even though we're only taking, we're going halfway this year, next year, maybe going, and there's dates certain that we might be going further. Would it be helpful for you to know that full arc, or just trust that we found a source that we can, grow over time?
I am so glad that you asked that question. And that's what I was going to make sure I had final remarks on.
Great.
If we're going to create the infrastructure that we know we need, we can't stop halfway. So one of my biggest concerns is that that the bill is not written to have a timeline and some clear benchmarks that, a path forward. And I understand, just like growing a business, I mean, you wouldn't just take all of the money and put it into the system, because it takes time for the systems to get in place and to create the right infrastructure. But we basically need a business plan to fix the childcare system. So I think what you just talked about, in my world, we would call that a business plan. What's our 3 to 5 year business plan? Not just the first piece of it. So I thank you for asking the question. And yes, I would not feel comfortable unless that was specifically outlined, that there was going to be a part 2. This is halfway and now there's a part 2. That really shows careful planning. It shows that people understand what it means to create an infrastructure. And we're kind of using this first phase to set the groundwork for the completion. And yes, wholeheartedly support that, and would be concerned if we didn't have it.
So I appreciate that. That's how I feel going into this. And I'm aware that then the headline is like the number in 2030 and not the number today. And that gets really scary for people, right? So would appreciate, like, if you have thoughts on that right now, great. If not, would appreciate your ongoing partnership and thinking some of that through.
You're right. The messaging is going to be important, because unless you're really involved in this, you kind of do get scared with the big price tag. I think this needs to be that this is critical infrastructure, and this is where we need to get, and here's what it looks like, kind of creating like, here's where we're going, and this gets us halfway. I think we have to paint the vision for people of what it's going to look like. That's the only way and we can keep talking about this, keep trying to figure out how it's mostly in the messaging, because once I have found that once people sit down and understand what the problem is and how to fix it, they go, yep, makes sense. I haven't heard, honestly, one person in the 3 years of the business folks that I've been talking to that don't get it after they've kind of, sit down and grapple with it and then say, yeah, this is what we need to do. I do want to add something. I think it often, somebody asked the question, why don't you just do it within your company? And then the same question was asked, what happens if this fails to pass? And I think those are tied. I think what happens is the big employers, right? They will create a childcare center and they probably will add slots. But it doesn't help. It doesn't create the kind of entrepreneurship. It doesn't create the kind of communities that we talk about wanting, right? It's another way that employees will be shackled to the larger companies and not go out and start their own business. It's a disadvantage for small businesses to not all pay into a system so that people are on equal playing ground when they're trying to recruit employees. And I haven't heard that talked about, but I've been a small business owner. I owned a small barber shop. So I know that, you're always competing with the bigger players, and this will just be, the hospital will certainly have and they are planning to have a childcare center. The big employers will, but it doesn't help the small employer.
Yes, Scott.
Michelle, yourself and the last other two business owners that have been on, I'm getting a general theme is that you'd really like to see an increase in the number of high quality early childcare slots that are available to your employees. Does TwinCraft also expect that whatever we pass out of here, if we pass anything out, that would also make that same high quality childcare more affordable for your employees?
Yes, that's what we're hoping for. That's the goal. We all know mental health's a big issue, and one of the things is just people being able to pay their bills, buy a house, have things be affordable. So yes, that's
okay. Thank you.
And I can talk about TwinCraft as an individual entity and why we support it. But I just spent a couple hours with Chris, the CEO of Burton. And one of the, as another manufacturer, one of the things that we are all very aware of is that when we get the systems right in Vermont, the water rises and we all rise together. Although we're all competing for the same employees, what we'd really like is for Vermont to be more affordable and to attract and keep more people here. So this is a really good thing for the state of Vermont, for everybody. One of the things that I wanted to mention is, I don't know if you're aware of the Dudley Fund, but the Dudley Fund was created with a bunch of Vermonters who all contributed to it so that we could then lend small businesses money, so the entrepreneurs money so they could start their business in Vermont. The thing that's been consistent with all of these folks is who's going to watch my kids? There's two things they say: where am I going to live and who's going to watch my kids? And, you know, the free market will eventually take care of housing. But one of the things that I've learned is it just won't take care of childcare. So I love the question about how do we go all the way? We go all the way because we need to do this. This is so critical. Anyway, I'll stop because I love answering questions. Anybody else? I don't want to go on.
This might apply more to the two previous people who testified, but how many of your workers are remote workers?
None. We're a manufacturer. We can't work remote.
I'm just thinking that the people we've talked to are South Burlington, and implementing the kind of childcare system that we're talking about in South Burlington is very different than implementing it out in the hinterlands, where there is a less density of children that are going to need it and a less available workforce and all those sorts of things. So do you have any thoughts on that? I can see things going fairly well in a densely populated Chittenden County, but what about the rest of the state? Do you see any problems with that or advantages to that?
I see opportunities, and here's why. You know, I think it was Brian. It's CCV has over 500 students enrolled in early childhood education, and where I see the opportunities in more areas, and talking to a couple of the home care providers is home care providers. You know, that is a great business model for when it makes economical sense for somebody to do it. You know, if you're a home care provider and you also have two other jobs, which is the case right now for many of these folks, it's not a very attractive field to go into. But when it does become more financially viable, I could see in the rural areas of Vermont, where actually a lot of my employees live, that becoming a viable business option for people.
So you said that a lot of your workers live in rural Vermont, so they're commuting in.
They're commuting in.
And the hope is that they would, that's the hope, but one option is that they would have the daycare near their home, and the other is that they would have the daycare near their job. But
yep. And employees feel differently. Some love it near their home and others prefer it near their work.
Okay.
Everybody's family situation is very different.
Okay.
My child screamed nonstop the entire time they were in a car for like the first year and a half of their life. And so I always look for childcare near home.
Mine for that every day.
Yeah.
Well, let's say if you have an unpredictable work schedule and you have no idea when you're going to get out of your job, it's really convenient to have your childcare center in your rural community so that your partner can pick them up.
Yep. And especially, you know, like we have shift work. So we do 4 days a week, 2 10-hour shifts. So the timing, that's often what happens for our employees. One parent drops the child off, another one picks them up. So like I said, everybody's family situation is really different. What else?
Thank you. Do you have anything else you would like to add?
No, I think I'll just end with, I hope there is something in the bill that has a part 2 that's spelled out. It'd be great to have a path and a plan. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us and yeah, all your attention on this issue. Thanks.
Thanks.
Mr. Garter. Hi, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for the invitation. Good afternoon, everyone. Does feel like we're back to winter after a couple of days of summer, but
yes,
hopefully it won't last.
I don't know if you can see our tulips on the table, but we brought a little bit of spring into the room today, so.
Excellent. Well, good afternoon. For the record, my name is Dimitri Garter. I'll talk about my affiliations and who I'm representing. I have a lot to say, and I'll try to be as efficient as possible. But given that I represent, among other audiences, a member organization in the Vermont Business Roundtable, our position is a little bit more nuanced than just my own views as an employer. So I want to try to go through my talking points, but if I'm going off track or going into too much depth, please do stop me. And I look forward to answering any questions. So very briefly, my background. So I co-chair the Early Care and Learning Task Force of the Vermont Business Roundtable. We're a membership organization of roughly 100 CEOs from all over Vermont. I'm also the co-founder and CEO of Global Z International. We're a software company located in Bennington. We're small business, family owned. We're only 11 employees, but we're mighty. And we are been in the software business in Bennington for 34 years now this summer. I'm also a dad of 4 young children. My youngest is going to be 3 in a couple of weeks, so I look at the issue through that lens as well. I'm the business representative on the Building Bright Futures State Advisory Council. I'm a board member of my local child care center here in Bennington, and I'm also actively involved in regional economic development. I'm an investor and an anchor tenant in the Putnam Downtown Redevelopment Project here in Bennington, which is where I'm located right now. The Vermont Business Roundtable is not an advocacy group or trade organization. As I mentioned, we're a membership organization, so we have a fairly diverse set of viewpoints. We skew towards the larger employers in Vermont, so I think we represent a fairly good cross-section of the economy. We've been really interested and vocal advocates for public investments in childcare for over 20 years, going back to our first initiative called Born to Read back in 1999. So like the legislature, this has been a top priority for us for many, many years, and we're really grateful and excited to see that the legislature is making this such a high priority this session. So why does the roundtable and employers more broadly view childcare as such a high priority? I want to emphasize that the groups or the constituency that we're primarily focused on in sequence are Vermont children first, Vermont families, and then third, the workforce. So we do view investments in childcare as being a workforce issue. However, our primary audience is really around investments in the future of Vermont's children and families. So we really view this as a broad benefit to all Vermonters. I'll echo some of the comments I heard. We view investments in childcare as an investment, not strictly a cost. We view it that way because we believe that we're paying for the lack of accessible, affordable quality childcare today. We're paying for it in terms of absenteeism, challenges in recruiting and retaining workers, in terms of downstream economic and social impacts on children. There's a growing and really robust body of research that shows that early care and learning, especially in the earliest years of development, can have significant positive impacts on children's downstream economic impacts. We see childcare through the lens of social determinants of health. So we see it as one of those foundational investments that can have generational impact throughout children's lives. And for those of you that are familiar with ACEs scores or adverse childhood experiences, an ACEs score of 4 or more makes children 32 times as likely to have problems in school. And that has impact not only on that child's development, but on costs to the school system and to the economy, and downstream impacts on healthcare and a wide range of other systems. I'll share a couple of stories, and then I want to talk about the funding and our views on the funding. So we're a small employer, 11 people, as I mentioned, but one story I was told by an employee is that the challenges in finding access to affordable quality childcare very much restricted her ability to have more children. Because we're a family-owned company, we offer very generous benefits to our employees, flex time, a very generous healthcare program and PTO. Even with those generous benefits, our employee found that she chose not to have more children because of the stress and challenges to finding childcare. And had it not been for the benefits and the flexibility that we provide, she would have had to choose not to have children at all. So that's a tragic story, of course, and is preventable. And we hear this story all the time. So this is a really good example of why we and the other members of the roundtable strongly advocate for these investments. On the positive side, Bill Stritzler from Smuggler's Notch tells the story about their decision to provide fully paid childcare to all of their employees. This is something that they implemented last year. And the impacts that they saw from those investments were almost immediate and very positive. They were able to fill vacancies almost immediately that had positions that had been vacant for a very long time. And they found that their employees were happier, and most importantly, the kids were happier because they were in a supportive environment with their peers. So we expect that we would see really rapid returns on the investment, both qualitatively and quantitatively. Couple of comments about some other things we heard about fully funding the system. We fundamentally agree with that. This is not a system that we believe can be inadequately funded and expect to have the outcomes that we want to see. The analogy I'll use is from Stephen Barnett, who's the senior co-director of the National Institute for Early Education Research at Rutgers University. And Mr. Barnett met with the Roundtable Early Care and Learning Task Force and spoke about his views on childcare as a national policy question. And he used the analogy of what he calls the peanut butter analogy. And he says what many states do when they try to fund childcare is they allocate an inadequate amount of funding for the system, and then they attempt to spread that funding as thinly as possible across the entire system. And the end result is that they not only don't achieve the outcomes that the system is looking for in terms of quality and positive impacts on the children, but in fact, what little funding goes into the system can actually be wasted and not achieve any outcomes at all. So we firmly believe that for the system to have the benefits that we are looking for, that it does need to be fully funded. And in particular, what the Vermont Business Roundtable has been advocating is for making the income eligibility criteria as broad as possible. So I know RAND only studied up to 500% of the federal poverty level. The basic challenge that creates is that it effectively prices out families who fall just above that level, whatever the level is chosen for the subsidy cutoff. And while those income ranges sound like a lot of money to a lot of Vermonters and a lot of Vermont families, and we can appreciate that, once the cost of care models kick in for providers, which we believe are fundamentally necessary to achieve the quality, those cost of care increases will very quickly price out families just above the subsidy caps. So we advocate for broadly funding the system and increasing the income eligibility to include as many families as possible. That also ties to our views about the funding. Because the Roundtable is a membership organization, we have a broad range of views on different sources of revenue. We don't have consensus on a specific source of revenue, given that there are a fairly wide range of perspectives. However, what is a shared principle among the large majority of Roundtable members is that we do believe in fully funding the system. We believe in public investments. We also believe that the funding should be as broad as possible so that the impact of the funding is as broad as possible. And I can talk about some specifics about that, but in particular, we would be very concerned about any funding mechanism that disproportionately impacts employers. We do strongly believe that employers should be doing our part to help with funding. However, any funding source that exclusively or predominantly falls to employers, we would be very concerned about that. And it's not just because of the economics to business. Part of our view on this is that while we view investments in childcare as having positive impacts on the workforce, as I mentioned, that's not the only impact that we view. This is a much broader system that all Vermonters are going to benefit from, whether they have families in the childcare system or not. There are downstream economic benefits. We know that we need to address some of the very challenging demographic issues that Vermont has. We believe childcare addresses a lot of those issues by attracting and retaining young families. We need to grow the base, and we believe that that's everybody's benefit and everybody's responsibility to participate in that. And what we don't want to end up with is a system that Vermonters view exclusively as a workforce issue, and it's employers' problem to solve. This is something that benefits all Vermonters, and to have that viewpoint, we think that everyone should have some skin in the game so that this is broadly viewed as infrastructure. As some specific examples about that, we don't have consensus on a payroll tax among our membership. Some members view that as being an appropriate way to fund this, some don't. However, if the system is largely or entirely funded through a payroll tax, we would feel very, very strongly that there needs to be an equal distribution of that tax impact among employers and employees. A 50-50 split is something that some in our audience have expressed some support for. But disproportionate impact on employers, I think, would have some of the negative impacts I mentioned. We have not modeled a gross receipts tax or an income tax. It meets some of the philosophical guidelines that we've published around revenue in terms of being very, very broad, and the rate effectively being very low. And we see some real merits to that. So again, we haven't modeled it ourselves. We would encourage the committee to look at something like a really broad source of revenue with a very low rate. And that's the type of thing that our membership would really strongly support. So I'll leave my comments there, but happy to answer any questions you have for me, either as an employer or as a representative of the Vermont Business Roundtable.
Thank you, Representative.
Yeah, thank you very much for your testimony. Several of the folks who have appeared before you were quite clear that they didn't want half a loaf. They wanted a high quality, geographically convenient to the workforce and at a reasonable cost. And that's frankly what we were recommended to examine. My question, reflecting the previous testimony, is does it make your group, I think, any more either confident or supportive if A, there's the plan to how we get to a statewide, high quality, reasonably affordable system is seeing the whole package, even though that may come in stages. Is that an advantage? Will that sustain support? I guess is the first observation I would make. And the other is, are there any of the three aspects, high quality, geographically robust, and affordable, implying subsidies, any of those three rank higher than the other two, for instance? Thank you.
Yeah. Great question. So in terms of the plan, I'm inferring from the question similar to the question that the chair asked with Ms. Ash regarding showing Vermonters if we only go part way through the system this year, what's the plan for getting the system fully funded and implemented in the long term? And yes, I would enthusiastically support that for a couple of reasons. I think one is that I'm fairly close to the policy details on this because of my role co-chairing a task force on this. However, most Vermonters and most Vermont employers are not as close to the policy details. And I worry that if understanding that there are some practical realities that require us to taper this program, we can't go 100% immediately. If we go part of the way, which we may have no choice, but then we come back and take another swing at this next year, I worry that some Vermonters and Vermont employers may say, this was not what we expected. Didn't we already solve this problem last year? So I think if there's a plan to implement this in phases, I think it's important to message that really clearly to Vermonters and Vermont employers that that's the plan, and also make sure that the momentum is there so that we can finish the job next year. Otherwise, I think it would be viewed as a problem we've already solved. Or, putting it a little bit more cynically, one of the concerns that employers have is the governance of the funding streams, right? So we want to make sure that any funding that goes into this is appropriately allocated, is being properly managed and governed. And if it's viewed that we're increasing funding yet again, whereas if that was viewed as unplanned, I think that would have unnecessary negative consequences. I think messaging that really early on is important. In terms of the priorities, it's a challenge because these are, the old adage is, you want three things, you can only pick two out of the three, right? Of the three, quality, access, and affordability, we do hope to achieve all three of those. We recognize that there are offsetting impacts where, in order to increase quality beyond a certain point, that could have other impacts on some of those other factors. I would say that quality, if I had to rank, quality is by far the most important of those components because it's what's going to achieve the outcomes for children. And secondarily, the outcomes for employers in terms of the workforce benefits. However, that quality goes directly in line with access and affordability as well, because if we can't make the system accessible and affordable to parents, they'll be priced out of the system one way or another. So, in order to achieve those broad outcomes to society, we believe that they're all important. However, if we had to choose, we would really be very concerned about any compromises that would reduce the quality of the system.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just give us a little perspective. How many children are related to your business, your employees? How many children roughly do you know they have?
So speaking for myself, 7 or 8 that I know of among some of our younger employees. However, we're very small. As I mentioned, we're 11 employees. Speaking for the roundtable, it's roughly 100 employers, again, skewing towards larger employers. I don't have a number, but for sure it's thousands of children that would be in the system. So we have a very, very broad purview as far as the impact on our business members and their employees.
In your company, do the employees receive any kind of compensation to help pay for childcare?
We haven't done that historically. We do have a very generous set of benefits for our employees. The way we've supported young parents with young children is through flex time, remote work, and as I mentioned, generous healthcare subsidies and benefits like that. We're very small. We would certainly consider a childcare benefit. However, my personal workforce tends to skew a little bit towards the older end of the spectrum. We're a 34-year-old business. We've got employees that have been with us for decades. Their children are grown and adults. So it would be disproportionately distributed among employees if we had a childcare subsidy. If we were larger, we certainly would consider that. I'll infer from the question what some other of the testimony today mentioned, which is as great as it is for employers, as positive as it is for employers to be able to offer that benefit, we don't view that as a structural solution. And I don't think any of the employers in our membership that offer a childcare subsidy, whether it's a subsidy or on-site childcare, which is the case for Smuggler's Notch, among others, I don't think that they would view that as being a systemic solution either. It is inaccessible to a lot of Vermonters. There are some very serious equity issues that are created through employer-only benefits. We already know that larger employers tend to offer more generous employee benefits across the board, whether it's healthcare, paid time off, or childcare benefits. Smaller employers, for a variety of reasons, tend not to offer those benefits as generously and sometimes not at all. And a very, very large percentage of Vermont's employment is with those smaller companies. So while it's great for employers that can offer that benefit, it's not a structural solution. And by the way, those that do so at great cost. They're dealing with some of the same cost challenges that our private providers are dealing with in terms of the cost of providing care versus what parents can provide for tuition. So I would say the economic dynamics are not really any different.
Yeah, right. Okay, thanks.
Anything else you'd like to share with us?
I just a personal note of thanks again for the invitation today and for the legislature really leaning into this. As I mentioned, we've been working on this for over 20 years. We view this as being perhaps the most important investment that we can make in Vermont's future in terms of the benefits to our children and families and also to employers in the economy. So we very much want to see this happen, and we're very pleased to be part of the process.
Thank you so much for coming and for joining us and being such a part of the solution. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And with that, committee, we are done for the day. Next week.